Okay, Boker Tov. I'd like to invite everybody to have a seat. Okay, Boker Tov. This morning's shiur is donated or sponsored by Esther Silvers in honor of the miracle Hashem made for her family 44 years ago when he saved their daughter from drowning. So as I said to Esther, some miracles we see openly, and then there are the ones that slide right by us unless we stop and take notice. So this one was, yeah, so Baruch Hashem, and we hope that she should continue to live and be well and be productive. Okay. This week's Haftarat, first of all, we begin a new Sefer, so that's always exciting. A new beginning, Sefer Bamidbar, which is the center piece. It's really the second half of the story, where it's the beginning. I don't know if we want to say the beginning of the end.
I'll just ask one question. My son, Rabbi Feinberg, mentioned something to me once, and I haven't really proven it, that the only Haftarah that is unified, that the Baruch, Timanim, Sephardic, Ashkenazim, say start and end with the same, is PARSHA
Bamidbar. Vayichan Sham Yisrael. Okay. Okay, so this is the only Haftarah that is all across the board. All the minhagim start and end at the same place, which is often even if we begin together, some end here, some end there. You see often notations in your chumash, in your siddur, whatever you're using to follow along, like Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, Torah Mizrach, so many different minhagim when it comes to Haftarot. So, okay, Bamidbar, I don't have them. I don't know where they were. Maybe at the front desk? In the front desk? Okay. And we'll see in a moment, in a few minutes really, where that is rooted in the concept of the Haftarah itself. As with many of the Haftarot that we've been dealing with, the ones from Yirmiyahu, the Haftarah sort of picks up in the middle of a story and presumes that we know the beginning of the story. So I do want to run through, even though that's not the first idea that we're going to encounter in the sources, I just want to give you the background for those who are not learning Yomi and perhaps are less familiar with the book of HOSEA, because it is not a story that we come across frequently for those. It's not an elementary school, and most high schools, even in high school, it's not in most high school curricula either. So let's just review the story. The fact that I'm going to say it sort of matter-of-factly should not take away from how bizarre it really is. In the beginning of Sefer HOSEA, Hashem tells the Navi HOSEA to marry a Zona, an Isha Zona, and have children with her, set up a family with her. And HOSEA follows Hashem's instructions. He marries a woman named Gomer Bat Divlaim. They have 3 children, and Hashem instructs him what to name the children. The first child is a son whom Hashem tells him to call Yisrael, from Yisrael. The implication being that Hashem will scatter Am Yisrael like seeds throughout the diaspora. The second child was a daughter, and Hashem told HOSEA to name her Lo Ruchama, no mercy, Ki Lo Arachem, Ki Lo Osifo Darachem Al Yisrael. Hashem says, I have no more pity on Am Yisrael. And the third child is a son whom Hashem tells him to call Lo Ami. You are no longer my people. So this is a very, and that's the whole parak. It's only a few psukim long, and that's the backdrop to our parak today. Now, did this really happen is a subject that the Mefarshim debate. That's really a whole shiur unto itself. For those who are interested, I suggest that you do look at the Yomi website. Just pull up one of the, I'm sure anyone who taught HOSEA Perek Aleph dealt with this issue. Rambam says it was all Mar'eh Nevu'ah. Abba Barnel says, how could you say that? Contradicting the text. And Chazal definitely see it as something, Ma'aseh Shehaya, that HOSEA, the Navi, went out and married a Zonah. When it comes to a Navi, Abarbanel says, we don't worry, there's no such thing as a Navi who's makpid on his own kavod by virtue of being a Navi. He sort of sublimates his sense of self to whatever Hashem demands of him, and that's his greater mission, his greater purpose. So there's no question of, is it disrespectful to the Navi to have him go and marry an Isha Zonah? Again, very fascinating discussion, but beyond the scope of our shiur today. So that's the backdrop. We have this wife of the Navi, who is an Isha Zonah, 3 children, Yisrael, Lo Ruchama, and Lo Ami. Our parak begins as if it seems like there's a piece missing, and in fact, Chazal fill it in, where they discuss this whole episode, a bizarre episode in HOSEA. Did Hashem really tell him to marry a Zonah? How could this have happened? What brought this about? And there's a whole conversation between Hashem and HOSEA, in which Hashem tells HOSEA that he's going to bring terrible punishments upon Yisrael, and HOSEA kind of says, okay, they deserve it, and Hashem gets very upset with him and says, you're supposed to defend them. That's your job as the Navi, as the leader of the people. You need to care about them. And then he tells him, go and marry a Zonah and have children with her. And then between Parak Aleph and Parak Bet, between the ends of the story I told you and where our Haftarat picks up, Hashem then says to HOSEA, okay, now divorce her and send her away with her children. And HOSEA says, but I can't. She's my wife. They're my children. And even though she has behaved terribly, there's still a bond between us, and I still care for my children. And Hashem says, oh, now you understand. Okay, that's how you were supposed to feel in the first place. That's how I feel about Yisrael. And then he shifts to a more positive nevuah, which is where our Haftarah opens up. V'haya mispar b'nei Yisrael. והיה מספר בני ישראל ככל הים אשר לא יימד ולא ייספר. והיה במקום אשר ייאמר להם לא עמי אתם, ייאמר להם בני כל חי. There will come a day when the number of Bnei Israel will be too great to count. They will be like the sands of the sea, which can't be counted or numbered. And in place of Lo Ami, they're not my nation, people will be saying, B'nai Kel Chai, these are in fact the children of the living God. And as we'll see, as we go through the rest of the Haftarah, the names of the children are all changed, except for Yisrael remains Yisrael. I'm going to wait a second because I just want you all to hear this beautiful idea. Okay, so Yisrael keeps his name. And the Malbim explains so beautifully that Yisrael comes from, as I said, zera, seeds. And yes, Hashem scattered us like seeds in the diaspora. And says the Malbim, the day will come when those seeds will blossom and flower and return in great numbers to Eretz Yisrael, having learned the lessons from Galut. Like we had to experience Galut. Galut was that experience that broke us down and opened us up to be able to return to Hashem in these great numbers. So that's why Yisrael remains Yisrael. Lo Ruchama is changed to Ruchama. So if anybody knows someone named Ruchama, this is where it comes from. Ruchama, such a beautiful message of the restoration of the precious relationship between Am Yisrael and Hashem. And Lo Ami is called Ami, once again. So that's the beautiful nivu'ah in this parak, in Parak Bet. The commentators on the Haftarah see the first connection between the parasha and the Haftarah very simply in the word mispar. As we know, Sefer Bamidbar is called in English numbers. Where does that come from? It's from the Latin, because the Latin names of the English, so what we call the English names of the Sfarim, really are not so English, right? Bereshit is Genesis, Exodus is Shmot. Shmot means names. How do we get to Exodus? So the English names come from the Latin, and the Latin names are derived from the names by which Chazal referred to each Sefer. So Bereshit was Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, Genesis, the origins. Shmot was Sefer Yetziat Mitzrayim, so it became the book of Exodus. Vayikra, Leviticus, Torah Kohanim. Bamidbar, in the language of Chazal, is Chumash HaPekudim, the book of counting, because it opens with a count of Bnei Israel, and then at the end of the Sefer, towards the end, not the very end, but towards the end of the Sefer, Moshe Rabbeinu counts the people again. So they're counted at the beginning and the end of the Sefer, therefore it is called the Book of Numbers. So here we see the connection in Pasuk Bet of the Parasha, the second Pasuk, Se'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael le'mishpachotam le'beit avotam, b'mispar shemot kol zachar legulgolotam, count them according to the names of every male head. And the Haftarat opens, V'hayam mispar b'nei Yisrael kechol hayam, as we just read. And Reb Yaakovson in Chazon HaMikra, in source number 3, says, you have it staring you straight in the face. Harei kan makbil yeudo shel hanavi lehatchalat haparasha. The mission of the Navi is parallel to that of the beginning of the parasha. But parasha nidrash Moshe lifkod et ha'am. In the parasha, Moshe is demanded of him to count the people. Ladat et misparam hamduyak. We know their exact number. Why does he have to count them? Kedei lahachin et kol hasidurim lechanayat ha'am sviv hamishkan al pi hishtaychut l'shevet v'degel. So, Bnei Israel are about to set up their encampment, according to which they're going to travel throughout the Midbar, surrounding the Mishkan, each according to his family and according to his shevet. So Moshe Rabbeinu has to know how many are in each in order to set up the encampment. V'ilu ha'haftara, but so now the connection, he says, is very blatant. Mispar. But there's also a contrast. Ilu, however, ha'haftara mitnabet al mispar ko atzum shel bnei ha'uma she'en makom l'sfira u'lemifkad. The Haftarah opens with a vision of the people so numerous that it's impossible to count them. So in that way, it's a contrast to the parasha. In the parasha, Moshe has to count them because they're going to have a very finite encampment, a finite setup for the way they're going to be camped in the Midbar. In the Haftarah, the vision is they're going to be so numerous you won't even be able to count them. However, the Gemara raises a contradiction. First, the Gemara says in the beginning of the Piska, Amar Rabbi Elazar, anybody who counts Bnei Yisrael is over alav. We're not allowed to count because it says Asher lo yimad velo yisafer. The Navi said they should not be counted. And then this question: 1 lav or 2 lavim because it's 2 restrictions. Okay. In the middle of the second line, you have Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yonatan raised a contradiction. Ktiv v'aya mispar bnei Yisrael kechol hayam, uchtiv asher lo yimad velo yisafer. There seems to be a contradiction between the beginning of the pasuk and the end of the pasuk. On the one hand, the Navi says they're going to be like the sands of the sea. That's something finite. Now, I don't recommend going to the beach and trying to count the sand. But, says Rabbi Yonatan, it's theoretically doable, right? Because grains of sand are something finite. If it would be exhausting, it would be nearly humanly impossible, but it's still something finite that can be counted. And then the Navi goes on to say, Asher lo yimad velo yisafer. So there are 2 suggestions as to a resolution that are given in the Gemara. One is lo kashya, not a problem, this is a standard formula sort of in the Gemara. Raise a contradiction and then it's resolved. Lo kashya, it's not really a problem at all because one applies to one set of circumstances, one phrase applies to one set of circumstances and the other to a second set of circumstances. The first is kan bizman sheYisrael osin ritzono shel makom, kan bizman she'ein osin ritzono shel makom. When are we innumerable? When we do the will of Hashem. When we're doing the will of Hashem, then the second half of the pasuk applies. No one can count us. We are beyond countable. But bizman she'ein osim ritzono shel makom, when we are not doing the will of Hashem, we become finite. Our numbers shrink. Rabbi Amar, a second suggestion. Mishum Abba Yossi ben Dostai. Lo kashya, also not a problem. Kan bidei adam, kan bidei shamayim. One is talking about if man tries to count us, then we're not countable. Bidei shamayim, Hashem can count us. Why is that a good thing then, that Hashem can count us? So, beautiful explanation by Yam Derech. I think I quoted it last week. This is a sefer that my son had bought for me. Rabbi Yechiel, the name escapes me at the moment. Mitartzim shehamispar bekamut hu davar she'efshar lispor. Afim yil'eh hasofer. Even if someone were to get very tired and worn out trying to count it, when we say the word mispar by definition means something finite that can be counted. Sapar also means a border, right? Like a boundary. So it means something that has a limit. So therefore, if you use the word mispar, by definition, it means it can be counted. Hare yesh lo mispar. Ma she'en kein eichut hamispar. But that's not true of the value of something. The value of something can't always be measured in a finite way. Kmo shematzinu. Moshe shakul keshishim ribo. We find in various places in Parshanut, in the Gemara, where it talks about Moshe Rabbeinu is valued as if he's equal to the entire Klal Yisrael. Or we learned the idea of Shmuel Hanavi was shakul k'Moshe ve'Aaron, right? And then the three heavyweights the three lightweights are equivalent in value to the three heavyweights. Like Gidon, Yiftach, and Shimshon are equivalent to Moshe, Aaron, and Shmuel. Now, obviously, doesn't mean that they're the same, but each in his generation was equivalent to another. So the value of something is much, much harder to determine. So he says, Ze efshar lispor rak b'mishkal kel deot Hashem. The only one who really knows the value of someone, of a person, is Hashem. So if Hashem is counting us because we're doing His will, that's a beauty, and that's what's going on in the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar as well, when Rashi says it's a sign of chibah, that Hashem counts us because He loves us. Hashem doesn't need to count us to know our number, but He counts us because He loves us. Because when you're fond of something, when you care for something, you count it to make sure it's all there, to sort of, if you have somebody like a child with a collection, so that they want to hold it in their hands and admire it and this and that. So Hashem is singling us out and looking at each one of us and valuing each of us. That's what it means to be counted by Hashem, right? To be valued. And that's kshe'osin ritzono shel makom. That Hashem can count us. Hashem does count us because He loves us. So that's kshe'osin ritzono shel makom. Yesh lekol echad miYisrael. And it's not, you don't have to be Moshe Rabbeinu. Yesh lekol echad miYisrael mishkan be'ichut hamispar asher lo yimad velo yisaper. Each one of us is indefinably valuable in the eyes of Hashem. Only Hashem can say how valuable we truly are. But when we don't do the will of Hashem, harehem kechol hayam sheyesh lo mispar. Then we're like kechol hayam, which is finite. And, it's a grain of sand. And yes, it would be a tircha, but it's possible to count. And this can change in one instant. We can go from being viewed as grains of sand to being viewed in the eyes of Hashem as like, wow, each one is so precious and so valued. Grains of sand we don't look at a grain of sand as so especially valuable. If anything, we try to get it all off, get it away before we walk into the house. We don't want to take it in with us because it's something that we discard. But it can, in a second, we can go from being treated that way to being treated as something to be held and cherished and valued by doing the will of Hashem. Rev Mendel Hirsch. Okay, so I found it in Hebrew. After last week, we had a little discussion about this for those who were here. I know many of you were on the Tiyul last week. So we had a discussion about whether the Seder Haftarot is available in Hebrew. So I didn't find it in hard copy in Hebrew, but I did find it online. A lot of copies available in German, the original. So maybe someday, but not right now. So Rev Hirsch explains this concept similarly, that we're talking about value, but he explains it on a national level rather than an individual level. So we have this beautiful view of each of us as an individual, so precious in the eyes of Hashem. He says, Mispar more b'derech klal kamut mu'etet u'mitzumtzemet. Same as we said, Mispar is something definable. Generally, when we talk about Mispar b'nei Yisrael, it's because they're small. It doesn't mean a large number. It means, again, something that has limitations. Lo biglal, so b'nei Yisrael are called Mispar, lo biglal ha-mispar ha-mamashi no'edet li Yisrael chashivut. Our chashivut as a nation doesn't come from the fact that we are so great in number. Our chashivut is afal pikein yechashev hamispar hachomri hakaton shel zera Yisrael bein ha'amim keba'al mashma'ut. Even though we are very, very small among the nations, we still carry a lot of weight. We are a meaningful presence among the nations. Kamo chol hayam. It's as if we were as numerous as the sands of the sea. Asher ein samim lev lachalakav habodedim. When it comes to the sands of the sea, we don't think about sand, every single individual grain. We see an expanse of sand, a lot of sand. So too, lo yimad velo yisafer. Ubechol zot, hu kechomat magen befi nachsholei yam hamista'arim. We are like a seawall that holds back the breaking waves in the world. We provide stability in the world. We are the ones who are in possession of the truth, of moral truth, of religious truth, of all the concepts of justice, tzedek, mishpat, chesed, are all rooted in Am Yisrael, and therefore our presence among the nations is extremely significant, even if we are scattered among the nations of the world, even if we are minute in terms of our numbers when you count us. Our presence is magnified. We are extremely significant. Right. Yes. And we talk about the double standard that's applied to when they look at us. But at the same time, yes, we should demand of ourselves a higher standard of behavior, because we do represent the truth of morality and justice, that we brought this to the world as the conveyors of the word of Hashem. So therefore, this has tremendous significance. So when we are conscious of this role, he goes on to say in the continuation of the commentary, when we as Jews are conscious of this role, and we are proud of this role, and we act in accordance with it, then the nations of the world look up and respect us. It's when we hem and haw and try to conform to their standards, and we fall down on the job, then they also look down on us and disregard our presence, because we become vulnerable and a sort of an easy target. So we have to be proud of who we are and recognize that this is our role. We are here in the world to be that wall of honesty and upright behavior representing the word of Hashem. And in that way, mispar, we're not counted, as how many are we? What are we? Something like 1% of the world population? I don't know, remember, the decimal points go up and down, but we're somewhere around 1% of the world's population. But you would never know that reading the papers, if anybody does such a thing anymore, or getting our news however we get it these days. Okay. The Sfat Emet, the Ger Rebbe on Bamidbar, says, "Ubamidrash v'haya mispar b'nei Yisrael kechol v'chulei lo yimad v'lo yisafer." And there's this contradiction between the beginning and the end, where it seems like we're going from being something finite to something infinite. How does that happen? He says that's the progression of Am Yisrael. We started out as something very minute, very finite. Shoresh b'nei Yisrael gimel avot. We all came from the same 3 forefathers. From there, we grew to Yud Bet Shvatim, 12 tribes, to Shivim Nefesh, Samech Ribo. We kept growing exponentially. Ve'achar kach ein mispar. We get to the point, if we continue on that trajectory, from the Avot to the Shvatim, to the 70 who went down to Mitzrayim, to the 600,000 who left Mitzrayim, we would become infinite. What's the key? We have to remain connected to our roots. And he gives the image of roots because if we think of a plant, as soon as a plant is uprooted, what happens? It begins to wither and to die. And we can do whatever we do to try to keep it alive. When we bring flowers into our home, right? You can add a little bleach or whatever your trick is to put an aspirin in the water, all the tricks to keep flowers alive longer. It's only going to give it a day or two, right? As soon as it's disconnected from its roots, the flower begins to wither and to die. He says the same thing is true of us as a people. If we disconnect ourselves from our roots, if we don't remain connected to the shoresh of the shlosha avot, the yud bet shvatim v'chulei, then we will become like mispar, very finite, countable. But we will, if we continue the trajectory and continue the teachings and remaining attached to the heritage of our forefathers, then we will be lo yimad v'lo yisafer. Absolutely. Oh, he is certainly, yeah, and if you read the whole, it's, yes, definitely responding to the time, but I think it continues to be very relevant as well. But, this is something, if we have to know who we are. We don't know who we are unless we know where we come from. That's the truth, right? Unless we remain attached to where we come from, then we can't possibly know who we are or where we're headed. Iyunei Haftarat, Rav Rivlin says all of this is really connected to, it's getting us ready for Matan Torah. Parashat Bamidbar is always read the Shabbat before Shavuot. So I know, like, we're on Tuesday, it's hard to get into that mindset, and we're a little bit more in the Yom Yerushalayim mindset right now, which is where we should be, Baruch Hashem. But by Shabbat, we're going to be thinking towards Shavuot. So that's where we're headed. And he says, this is Zo hachanatenu lematan Torah. Lo tishtush hazehut ha'ishit v'havichat ha'am kulo la'eder. We do not erase or to completely efface who we are as individuals. Who we are, it's sort of a combination of the two approaches of Bayam Derech and the Haftarot of Rav Hirsch. We have to retain our individual identity. We're not looking to act as a nation like a flock of obedient sheep who don't have an independent thought, who just do as they're told without thinking about why we're doing what we're told. We are supposed to do what we're told, of course. And sometimes the image of sheep is a positive one. But here he means it as like, when we do what we're supposed to do, we should do it thoughtfully, because with intention. So what is the vision of standing to receive the Torah? Kol echad ve'echad lechud bekulam yachad. This is the kulam yachad, right? Everybody together, same minhag, same haftarah, kulam yachad. That's how we receive the Torah. Each as an individual with his own individual identity, each shevet with its individual flag representing its qualities as a shevet, and nevertheless unified, respectful of one another's differences and the role that each one plays, contributing towards a common goal. That's the preparation for Matan Torah that we see in the parasha, and that's the preparation for Matan Torah that we see reflected in this haftarah when we talk about mispar b'nei Yisrael, asher lo yimad v'lo yisafer, mispar meaning the value of every individual and how we contribute to the national identity and the national purpose. That's the first idea in terms of connecting to the parasha, mispar b'nei Yisrael, very, very overt connection. But there's a lot more to the haftarah, the story. The haftarah continues, as I said, so it opens up with just this pasuk, which is a response to HOSEA, like, okay, now you see that it's not so easy to just, Hosea's words to Hashem in the Gemara, when they had this discussion, Hashem said, I'm going to punish them, and Hosea said, okay, hachlifem be'uma acheret. Switch them out. Get rid of them. They're sinning. Choose another nation. And then Hashem tells him the whole marry a zonah and have children with her, and he sees it's not so easy to separate once you've chosen someone, even if they turn out to be not your ideal, not what you would have liked them to be when you chose them. Still, you have created a bond that is not so easily severed. And he gives him this positive nivuah, mispar b'nei Yisrael kachol hayam, etc. And then ultimately, nikbitzu b'nei Yehuda u'b'nei Yisrael yachdav, vision in the future when Yehuda and Yisrael will return to Eretz Yisrael together, v'samu lahem rosh echad, and they will be unified under one leader, ve'alu min haaretz, and they will come up to the land from all the lands to which they've been scattered, ki gadol yom Yisrael, and this is again, it will be a great day when all the seeds that Hashem has planted and scattered throughout the Galut will come to fruition and return to Eretz Yisrael with all of the qualities and all of the lessons that they've learned through the years of Galut. Imru la'achechem ami, at that point say to your brothers ami, v'la'achotechem ruchama, call your brother ruchama, as you call your sister ruchama, but then rivu ve'imchem. We have one argument that is not resolved, and that is with your mother. She remains a problem. She was the Isha Zonah. So among the brothers and sisters, we're to say, Ami, Ruchama, Yisrael, we're all together. But Rivu be'imchem Rivu, kihi lo ishti, va'anochi lo isha. So what's happening here? It's a beautiful explanation, Rav Hirsch. Kvar b'perak harishon ra'inu shebekriyat Hashem shel bat hanavi lo ruchama, this is in his commentary on Perak Aleph, Mavdilim b'charifut ben Yisrael bichlalo kemamlacha shenitnakra me'aviha shebashamayim. We distinguish between the institution, the state that has become foreign, distanced from our Father in heaven, uvein baneha hayichidim, and between her children, the children. So the mother represents the institution. The children, he says, so importantly, the underlined line, we have here an azhara l'shomrei emunim hasfurim b'Yisrael, to those people who hold on to the faith, lo laharshia et achehem v'achyotehem hatoim. Don't condemn those who have strayed, those who may be lost. O lirot bahem makchishei udam lelo takana. Don't write them off. Don't say they're lost to us, to the mission of Klal Yisrael. When it comes to dealing with individual Jews, no matter how far off what we think of as the derech they might be, right? I always take issue with this, like when people say, oh, that kid is off the derech. Right? They're on a different derech, but they're just taking a longer route, right? They're taking a few detours. This is how we have to, we reach out to people, not laharshia, not to condemn. Imru la'achechem, when we're dealing with our brothers, say, Ami, you're still part of the nation. You still belong to us. Come back. Come for Shabbos. Come for a meal. Right? Let me introduce you to your heritage. Let me bring you in. That's not when we're dealing with the institution. If there's an institution that represents a path of wrongdoing, that we condemn. That's rivu be'imchem. Rivu. Take issue with the institution, but not with the individuals. With the individuals, reach out and bring them close. It's such a beautiful concept. Yes, in his time he was dealing with the reform movement. Yes, 100%. That's mental heritage. I mean, it's actually interesting in so many ways. Reading through more sort of sequentially the commentaries. He is so his father's son. It's so fascinating, the language and the use of language and the phrases and the sense of mission and purpose is very, very resonant of his father. He's the son of Rav Shamshon Shmuel Hirsch, so it's very connected. Okay, that's rivu v'imchem rivu ki hi lo ishti v'anochi lo isha. And then we see there's a long process, really beginning in Pasuk Daled with this take issue with the institutions of wrongdoing, and then there's a there are very harsh descriptions of the punishment. Hashem will send us out to Galut. Hashem will take away all of the material success that we enjoyed in Eretz Yisrael because we became so attached to that material success that we saw that as our sense of purpose rather than a higher standard of morality. And Hashem's, it's very vivid descriptions. Hashem will strip the mother of all of her beauty and her glory, and she will suffer terrible punishments. And that is really Psukim Daled through Tetvav. The worst of the punishment appears in Psukim Yud through Tetvav. So I divided it up. In the beginning, there's the Riv Habanim Ba'im Habogedet, the children who are told to take issue with their traitorous mother, and then how Hashem, there's one spark of hope in the middle, in Psukim Chet and Tet, Hinani Sachet Darkech Bisirim Vegadarti. There are different explanations for that, but ultimately there's a little bit of hope there when she says Elcha ve'ashuva elishi harishon ki tov li az me'ata. She's suffering so much in Galut that she says, I'll return to my first husband because he was better than this. Like, it wasn't so great, but he was better than this. So there's a little spark of hope for tshuva, but then it gets bad again. The punishment, as I said, the most severe part of the punishment is Psukim Yud through Tetvav. And then finally in Pasuk Tet Zayin, Hashem says, Lachein hinei anochi mifateha v'holachtiha hamidbar v'dibarti al liba. It's a beautiful expression. Hashem says, I'm going to take her mifateha. What's lifatot? It's to tempt. So I'm gonna like tempt her out to the midbar, and we'll see. I think I brought it a little bit later. Rav Mendel Hirsch says lifatot it's related to lifateach, to develop, and also to open. It's like I'm going to open when we tempt someone. What do? We open their mind in a certain direction. Like, open your mind and hear what I have to say. So Hashem says, I'm going to open her up. I'm going to tempt her out, and I'm going to bring her out to the midbar. And there, I'm going to be able to talk to her. V'natati la'it krameha misham. I'm going to give her back her vineyards, and everything she has suffered will become a gateway of hope. V'inta shama kimei neureha uchayom alota me'eretz Mitzrayim. V'anta shama, and she's going to return. She's going to be restored, like to her youth and the days. Here he's talking about the woman as an individual and the nation at the same time. It's like the mashal and the nimshal in the same pasuk. She's going to be restored to her youth, like the days when she left Mitzrayim, clearly is referring to the nation. V'aya bayom hahu ne'um Hashem tikri'i ishi v'lo tikri'i li od ba'ali. And when that happens, you're going to call me, you, the institution of Am Yisrael, will call me Ishi, my husband, not Ba'ali, which also means my husband, but has a different connotation, as we'll see. So, first of all, many of the Mefarshim note, this is a second connection between the Parasha and the Haftarah, the idea of going out to the Midbar. We have Anu Ro'im ki tzura acheret shel smuchin ben haparasha, in source number 12, Chazon HaMikra, Rav Jacobson, ben hasefer kulo, sheshmo Bamidbar, and this is a connection that relates not only to our parasha, but the entire sefer, which we call Bamidbar. Levein ha'haftara, hi hagisha ha'miuchedet lir'ot Bamidbar, gam mekom onesh, v'gam mekom hachshara l'chayim metukanim ba'aretz. What they have in common, what this vision of the Midbar in the Haftarah and the Sefer have in common, is a view of Bamidbar. Yes, it's a place where punishments take place. Sefer Bamidbar, if you want to look at it in a negative light, you can read it and see all the times Bnei Yisrael were punished. It's a hard Sefer to learn. It's a Sefer in which there's constant sin and punishment. Or you can look at it as a Sefer Hachshara, all the miracles that Hashem performed for us in the desert, which were both miraculous salvations and at the same time, on some level, trials that we had to endure. Right, in Sefer Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu speaks about the man as a test, because it's a test. Can we really be dependent on Hashem entirely for our food, waiting every day, sort of, can we feel that sense of, yeah, I know for sure it's really going to come, or is there's a sense of relinquishing control? So in that sense, yes, it's a miracle and it sustained us, but it also tested us. It's a trial. So we can see the Midbar in two ways. It's a place of punishment, but it's also a place that sort of trains us how to have a relationship with Hashem. And he cites the Rambam, who talks about leaving the Midbar and entering Eretz Yisrael, is that, wow, we can have a so much greater an appreciation for Eretz Yisrael having experienced the trials and tribulations of the Midbar. Had we gone straight from Yetziat Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael, from the miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim and Kriyat Yamsuf straight into Eretz Yisrael, it would have been too much for us, and we would not necessarily have seen the Yad Hashem, like we were talking about earlier, seeing Yad Hashem on a day-to-day basis in all the little things, the little miracles that occur every single day. We would have been too overwhelmed with the mitzvot, with the nisim of Kriyat Yamsuf, of Yetziat Mitzrayim, to appreciate how do we connect to Hashem in Eretz Yisrael. So we needed the Midbar. When things are too easy for us, too good for us, we fail to see Yad Hashem. That's his feeling here. It's sort of like what Dr. David Pelkovitz, I think I once called him Shlita in his presence, and he was very upset with me. But I say he's the Gadol Hador of adolescent psychology. Dr. David Pelkovitz. He's adolescents. He deals with. I taught in high school for many years, so I had many dealings with him professionally, and his daughter was my student, and we became close. We also have a personal friendship. Anyway, he's an amazing person, and he developed a term for what he calls affluenza, which is sort of the disease of affluence and of wealth. And this is a big struggle that our kids have today, is that they have it too easy. I don't feel the same way here, but in America, there's a certain very pronounced sense of affluenza among the youth, where they grew up with they never had to struggle for anything. They take so much for granted that they fail to see the blessings in what they have, and it creates a lot of dissonance in life. So essentially, the Midbar was a way of preventing affluenza. Was this you have to have it a little bit hard. You have to struggle in order to appreciate what you have. So Hashem says, I'm going to take her out to the Midbar, and there, in the isolation of the Midbar, and that's really what the Malbim highlights in source number 13. The Malbim highlights a sense of isolation. There's no one else there. So I'm going to take her away from all the things that tempt her, all the material temptations, all the social pressure that surrounds her in the place where she is, and I'm going to take her out to a place of isolation where I'll be the only one there with her, and she'll have to turn to me. And then we will be able to renew the bonds that we once shared in our youth. And that's the Midat HaRachamim. Reb Mendel Hirsch says in source number 14, Hashem says, he opens this set of psukim with the term Anochi. Right? Anochi. Lachein hinei Anochi mifateha v'holachticha. It's not Ani. Anochi represents the Midat HaRachamim. That's Anochi, Hashem Elokecha, asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I, Hashem, in my Midat HaRachamim, took you out of Eretz Mitzrayim. That's the foundation of our special relationship. So Anochi, with the Midat HaRachamim, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, HaMedaber El Rucha. I'm speaking Al Liba, to her spirit. I'm speaking, really, I want to touch her heart. I'm not just speaking to her intellectually. I want to go out into the Midbar where it's just the two of us, where I open her up a little bit, and she's ready to listen. And Sham dibarti al liba, v'natati la et krameha misham. And then I'm going to restore all of the material successes that she once enjoyed, but it's going to come misham, from there, from the Midbar. Bo Yisrael b'ne'urav ana b'truat simcha u'b'ha'aratzat Hashem na'aseh v'nishma b'midbar ha'amim shuv ye'orer kol Hashem et Yisrael. In the desert of the nations of the world, here the desert is it's a metaphor for Galut. Hashem is going to send you out to Galut. Now you may think Galut is a very crowded place. It's not a midbar. How are we in isolation with Hashem? Unfortunately, we're feeling it today. If I would have taught this 5 years ago, I don't know that I could have related it so clearly. But today, we see we are isolated. Bamidbar ha'amim. We're out there among the nations of the world, and yet we're in a desert. And we're alone with Hashem. And from within that aloneness with Hashem, out in the Midbar ha'amim, Shuv ye'orer kol Hashem et Yisrael. Hashem speaks to us, and we are aroused from our lethargy, and we want to return to our mission. There's a sense of regret for what we've missed out on in the past, and we are now prepared to receive prosperity and sustenance as it comes to us from Hashem. But misham, from those experiences, we have to suffer. We have to be in isolation, suffer among among the crowds, lonely in a crowd, with Hashem. And then, emek achor, all of the suffering that we're experiencing becomes petach tikva, a gateway of hope, something that opens up to us. Kepetach laila shel heres v'churban, hayal amito shel davar petach boker shel tkuma. What we saw as suffering really was the gateway to resurrection. And Rashi says, at that point, you'll turn to me to kri'i ishi, and you'll call me my husband, l'shon ish, me'ahava, lo miyir'ah, not second best, not like, oh, it's hard here, maybe that wasn't so great, but at least it was better than here, like it was mikodem. Now, when we return to Hashem, in the final event, it's going to be l'shon ishut v'chibat neurim, my beloved husband, not Baal, which is Lashon Adnut, right? You get this a lot from young girls. Like, why does my husband call my Baal? He doesn't own me. There's a certain sense of ownership, of a relationship that has an aspect of yir'ah. We don't want to relate to Hashem as the Baal. Also, Baal has the connotation of Avodah Zarah. Right? The name Baal in throughout Navi is the name of the worst form of Avodah Zarah, the most prevalent form of Avodah Zarah that entered Am Yisrael in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash. So we want to get rid of that Lashon. No more Baal. Tikri'i ishi, you'll call me my beloved husband. And then the Haftarat comes to an end with 3 beautiful psukim, which should be familiar. V'charati lahem brit bayom hahu. There's going to be a renewed covenant. Im chayat hasadeh, im of hashamayim, v'remes adama, etc. All the elements of nature will attest to the brit. Ve'erastichli le'olam, ve'erastichli b'tzedek u'v'mishpat u'v'chesed u'v'rachamim, ve'erastichli be'emunah, v'yadat et Hashem. I will betroth you to me, Hashem says to Am Yisrael, forever, with all the values that we represent and we teach to the world, tzedek, mishpat, chesed, rachamim, and Hashem says, erastichli be'emunah, there's going to be faithfulness between us, no more zonah. V'yadat et Hashem, and you will know Hashem. So 2 questions. First of all, if this is representative of an everlasting bond, why erusin and not nisuin? Why is this presented as Hashem says, I'll become engaged to you? Engagements, they're not so easy to break, but still, it doesn't seem as permanent an institution as a marriage, and this is meant to represent something everlasting. So here, Reb Rivlin explains, Ze pesha hanevuah v'habracha ve'erastichli le'olam, tamid ein lehikanes l'ayefut shel shigra. We don't want to enter into a state of routine, boring, not boring, chas v'chalila, but just we get sort of worn out sometimes. L'sova shel hapat shebasal, that's his version of affluenza. Right, that there's always bread in the basket, so we get used to it. We take it for granted. Yesh lada'at latzeket et hachidush, et hara'ananut. We want to experience something in a way that's fresh, that's new. Et hakmiha v'hazohar shel yemei ha'erusin. It's like the starry-eyed, love of the kala who just got engaged, and there's all the hope, all the excitement. Right, everything is looking forward. There's no looking back with regrets. Everything that was, all the bumps along the road are all of a sudden erased, and it's just starry-eyed hope for the future. That's how we want our everlasting relationship with Hashem to be. Every day in that relationship with Hashem should be ve'erastichli le'olam. It's like a newly engaged chatan v'kala who only see the good. They don't know yet what she looks like when she wakes up in the morning. You know, he still doesn't know that her hair is curly and not straight. And all the hopes and dreams are there. And that state, it's like that moment of engagement is the way that our relationship with Hashem should feel, le'olam, forever. V'yadat et Hashem. And it ends with the words, V'yadat et Hashem, you'll know Hashem. What does it mean to know Hashem? Teid'i be'emet et Hashem, says Rav Mendel Hirsch in source number 18. Yeda, harei hi ha'hakara ha'amuka v'ha'chadura shel chavaya she'adam haya chayota. When we say, I know something, in Tanakh, yedi'ah always means empirical knowledge. I know from experience. I tried it, and I saw the results. I experienced the results. So, v'yadat et Hashem, I know that intimate relationship with Hashem. I personally experienced it. Shel nisayon atzmi, it's personal experience. Da'at et Hashem oreh al tchusha mleat osher shel hashra'ah. It's a constant state of happiness, inspiration, shel simcha, but not simcha like, you know, it's my birthday and I got a nice present and I'm happy. But simcha, like with a sense of, like we spoke about again last week for those who were here, bitachon, the sense of happiness that comes from a sense of security. I rejoice in my relationship with Hashem because I feel secure. Shel simcha shenolda b'toda'ah shel kirvat Hashem. I feel happy and content and secure in my relationship with Hashem. And this we can only hear, this is clearly his father, and I literally went to a shir this past Shabbos, and somebody brought up Shimshon Rav Hirsch saying exactly this, and I was like, wow, that's amazing, because I had just prepared it. That's I efshar lizkot ba ela b'derech shmirat hamitzvot. And yes, this is clearly an anti-reform polemic as well. That the only way to really know Hashem and feel that closeness with Him is through Torah and mitzvot. After all, that's the guidebook that He gave us. He essentially handed it to us and said, here, this is how to get close to me, right? So when we keep Torah and mitzvot, that brings us closer to Hashem. And in that closeness, we feel that sense of security and happiness that we can only achieve in that way. B'derech kinyan shel tzedakah, mishpat, chesed, rachamim, all of the values that are represented by the Torah. Emet zu chozeret v'nishnet pa'amim mispar b'mikra b'mkom bo medubar al da'at et Hashem. Wherever in Tanakh it talks about da'at et Hashem, that's what it means. And I just want to, Rav Hirsch concludes here. He goes on and he has like a little sort of outburst, and he says, all those people who see Hashem, and they talk about Hashem as like the Old Testament God of wrath, the angry, vengeful God, which is the way some people, as I said, look at Sefer Bamidbar, that it's a harsh Sefer, there's a lot of punishment we see, and Hashem can sometimes come across as harsh. He says, this Haftarat is the answer. Because yes, you have punishment, but you have crime, and you have punishment, and then you have this everlasting love that the Navi says, why is Hashem punishing us? Because He wants to educate us. He wants to bring us closer to Him. It's not stam punishment. I'm angry at you. I'm going to avenge the wrong that you did to me. That's not what it's about. It's about bringing you back into this bond, into this brit that we have, this intimacy. And he uses the image of marriage because that's the image that there's no other, obviously it's impossible to really come up with a perfect analogy for Hashem. But this is the closest we can get to a perfect analogy between Hashem and the Jewish people, is the love between a husband and wife, where that love is an intimate love. It's a love that elevates the physical, it's the spiritual. Rav Soloveitchik talks about this, that it's a love that transcends the physical and brings the physical up to a much higher plane, and in which the communion between husband and wife takes place on a very sophisticated, spiritual, intellectual level. And that is the perfect image. That's the bond that Hashem wants with us. That sense of intimacy, that sense of we belong together. I know what you're thinking. I feel cared for. I feel loved. I feel like I'm in your embrace. And I know that even when I do something wrong, you may be upset with me, but you're going to forgive me and welcome me back with open arms, and I'm going to feel safe in that embrace. And that's I think, as we go into Yom Yerushalayim, that's a little bit of Hashem's embrace to us, is that you came here and you persevered, and you listened to go 19 years to persevere and live here with just this little sliver of a land and not even have access to the holiest places, but you stuck with it, so therefore I'm going to send you a little nishika, and not such a little, but big miracles of that we should be zoche to see to their completion.